The learning goals for this video are listed here. I think it's worthwhile to have a look at them and also to have a look at all of the things that I expect you to be able to do on the PowerPoint sheet that I handed out. Typical questions for AP Biology tend to ask more about things in general, where you explain usually something like the evolutionary advantage of a behavior and give a bunch of examples. So, what I want you to be able to do is to give different examples of learned and innate behaviors, and again, focus on those examples. You should be able to define different types of behaviors. So think about all of these as almost like term, definition, example. And you want to make connections for all of these behaviors to evolutionary or adaptive value. We talked about behavior, but it's been a while, so I just wanted to go over this quick definition with you. A behavior is a response in reaction to a stimulus. So as we go through these behaviors, think about the response and think about the stimulus that triggered that response. A long time ago, we talked about the difference between innate and learned behaviors. We said that innate behaviors are programmed in the DNA, and learned behaviors are ones that change with experience over time. If you've forgotten what the advantages are of each of those types of behaviors, it's worthwhile looking at them. We're going to go through each of these examples, then we're going to talk about some social behaviors, and that's how we'll finish. First, let's start with innate behaviors. The first innate behavior I want to talk about is called a fixed action pattern. What that is it's a sequence of behaviors, and sometimes they can be pretty complex, and that behavior sequence is triggered by something called a releaser or a sign stimulus. So this behavior sequence is done to completion as soon as the sign stimulus is seen or activated. So here's a classic example from the 1940s by a researcher called Tinbergen. And what happened with Tinbergen is he kept these fish called sticklebacks in a tank, and they were by the window. And what he noticed was that every time a red truck drove by the window by the tank, what would happen is these male stickleback fish would kind of rush the side of the tank and go into attack mode on the side of the tank towards the window. So he started to study this behavior a little bit more, and what he found is that a sign stimulus or a releaser for a fixed action pattern for male sticklebacks was to see this red belly. Another thing that he found was that these had to have eye spots as well. Now what Tinbergen did was he made a whole bunch of different shaped kind of fake fish and put those in the tank with the male sticklebacks, and found that no matter what the shape, and even if it wasn't a real fish or moving around that much, the sign stimulus of a red belly and an eye spot would stimulate this fixed action pattern of attack behavior. Another thing you should be able to do with behaviors is figure out their proximate cause and their ultimate cause. So remember, the proximate cause has to do with the anatomy and physiology of a behavior and the stimulus of the behavior, and the ultimate cause connects that behavior to its evolutionary or adaptive value. In this case, the stimulus for the behavior is the red belly of another male and the eye spot. So that's going to trigger the anatomy and physiology of this attack behavior pattern. So what's the evolutionary advantage of that? Well, by keeping away other male sticklebacks, any females that come into this male's territory are going to be bred by him, and he's going to pass on his genes in those viable, fertile offspring that he makes. Some other cool examples of fixed action patterns are with these digger wasps and with these gray lag geese. Now, there's a bunch of YouTube video links in here, and I'm not inserting them into the video for time purposes, but I'd recommend going and checking them out, because still pictures give you an idea of what's happening, but these videos really illustrate it well. So what happens with the digger wasp is what they'll do is they'll paralyze insects when they're hunting, and they'll drop those insects right by the opening of the nest. Then what the digger wasp does is he'll go into the nest and he'll kind of check out the lay of the land of what's happening inside of the nest. But while the digger wasp is in there, if a researcher takes that prey and drags it away a few inches, the wasp will come out, he'll find the prey, he'll bring the prey close to the opening of the nest, and he'll start that pattern all over again from the very beginning. So that's why this is called a fixed action pattern, because it's a pattern that is usually completed or taken to completion, the whole sequence, and you can't stop it once it's started. Another example is this egg rolling behavior in gray lag geese. So what happens with the gray lag geese is if an egg is removed from the nest, they want to get that back in, and so they use their beak to roll that egg back into the nest. Now what can happen is if you snatch this egg out in mid-roll, the goose will still continue that rolling behavior with its beak as if an egg was still there. Another cool thing that you can do is if you replace that egg with a light bulb or a baseball or something like that, it will still be an adequate releaser or a sign stimulus for this fixed action pattern. So, looking at proximate and ultimate causes, the stimulus for this behavior is the egg being out, and that triggers the anatomy and physiology of the egg rolling behavior. What's the ultimate cause of this? Well, if an egg is removed from the nest, the gray lag goose wants to be sure that the egg doesn't get too cold because the embryo inside would die. So the evolutionary advantage of this behavior is that it's going to ensure the success and survival of the offspring. The next type of innate behavior that I want to talk about is directional movement, and there are two types. Taxis, which is a very directed movement toward or away from a stimulus, and kinesis, which is more like increased activity in response to a stimulus. So let's talk about the two and give some examples. So anytime these behaviors are oriented where something is going toward the stimulus, that would be called positive taxis or positive kinesis. And if the movement is directed away from a stimulus, that would be called negative taxis or negative kinesis. Now we can combo this with the type of stimulus that it would be caused, or that would cause this. And for example, phototaxis would be taxis that's in response to a light stimulus. Chemotaxis would be in response to a chemical. This example over here has rheotaxis, which is in response to a current. So here's a trout, and it's swimming toward a current. So that's why this can be positive rheotaxis. So whenever the stimulus is of a current, a trout could orient itself toward that current. So the proximate cause of this would be the current is the stimulus, and the trout orients itself to swim into the current. The ultimate cause, or the evolutionary value of this behavior, is that any prey or food of the trout will just be kind of floating downstream, and all the trout has to do is kind of open its mouth and catch it a little bit. So it's way easier for the trout to get food. By getting food and not expending as much energy to get it, that's going to increase the trout's survival and ultimately increase its chances at reproduction. The example of kinesis that's given here is with a sow bug or a roly-poly, and roly-polies like dark, humid areas. And you've probably noticed this if you've ever picked up a brick or looked under a brick for some insects. What'll happen is as soon as that light hits the area under the brick, which is normally dark, the animals don't necessarily go directly into a dark place. What they do is they just increase their activity. So this movement, it's increased activity, but it's not necessarily being directed somewhere. It's just being directed kind of away from the light in a random manner. So this could be called negative photokinesis. The next behavior that I want to talk about is imprinting. And one interesting thing about imprinting is that it has an innate component and a learned component. To explain this a little bit better, I want to use a classic example with a researcher named Konrad Lorenz. And he researched imprinting on geese. What happens with geese is when, within the first couple of hours of hatching, the geese will follow around the first large moving object that they see. And then they learn behaviors from this large moving object. So the innate component of this is that there's a critical period, a time where this imprinting can only happen, and that would be just within the first few hours of hatching. Now the learned component of this happens also during a critical period that's programmed innately. So the learned component, whatever the gosling learns during that period, they will keep for life. So imprinting is largely irreversible. It's going to be locked in during the imprinting time. So even though this example is pretty famous and looks kind of cute, it's biologically relevant too. So I want you to focus on the biological relevance. So why would it be advantageous for a gosling to imprint on its mother? Well, imprinting is going to make sure that the goslings follow their mother and learn appropriate behaviors like how to feed, how to defend themselves, how to interact with other geese. And because the goslings are always going to be near their mother because of the imprinting, she can also protect them from predators or weather or things like that. And if an animal imprints on the wrong object or a different species, that's actually going to decrease their ability to survive and reproduce. So let's break this down in terms of proximate and ultimate cause. Proximate cause is going to happen during that critical period. So what's the stimulus? In the case of the geese, the first large moving object. The ultimate cause of this is what I explained about being able to learn appropriate behaviors and get protection. So this behavior increases survival by offering the gosling protection and increases its ability to reproduce by learning species-appropriate behaviors. An interesting case where humans can use imprinting is with conservation. So here's an example where whooping cranes were imprinted and taught appropriate behaviors by humans that wore crane suits. So here you can see a human in a crane suit, and what they did was they tried to exhibit appropriate crane behaviors and expose the cranes to crane sounds during this imprinting period. Another interesting thing they did was they used these aircrafts that are shown here to teach the whooping cranes the appropriate migration patterns. So this way they were able to raise whooping cranes in captivity, but not have them imprint and be endangered even further by imprinting on the humans. Another interesting example of imprinting involves the development of songs in some songbirds. So we see two different examples here. So some songbirds must be exposed to the appropriate song of their species in order to learn it. And that exposure would be the sensitive period or the critical period where the song would be imprinted on them. And that critical period is actually before the bird even starts singing its song. So let's look at this timeline. Usually, the bird has to listen to the song, and during that listen time, memorize it. They'll also practice the song, and then they'll perfect the song. Let's see how this looks in this example. So here's learning or listening to the song of the birds around them. Then they form a template or a rough draft of the song. They build and kind of perfect sub-aspects of the song or certain sections of the song. And then, after about 1 year, when they're mature and they can mate, they crystallize their final song, or they memorize it. After this, their song won't change. Other birds have a more complex way of learning songs, where they can actually change their songs over the year. So here's an example of a finch that, before each breeding period, actually makes its song more complex. So there's kind of a window where the song is plastic or it can change. And then after each plastic period, the new song, the final song, gets locked into place for that breeding season. So if you think about this, it's actually really cool. If you were a female finch, who would you want to breed with to indicate better fitness? Would you want to breed with a male that has a simple song or a more complex song? Well, what does it mean to have a more complex song? That means that that male has survived more breeding seasons, more years, than a male with a simple song. So that would be a really good indicator of fitness. If a bird has survived for 3 years or 4 years compared to a bird that has survived for 1 year. Another interesting example is our friend, the cowbird. And remember, the cowbird was the bird that does the parasitic nesting. So what happens is the females will lay an egg in another bird's nest, and that other bird will incubate the egg for them and feed them. So this looks maybe like a meadowlark or something, and a cowbird is in its nest. Look how huge that bird is. So it almost like outcompetes the other birds in the nest. And those eggs are actually programmed to hatch very quickly. So they'll hatch before the other eggs, and they'll kind of crowd them out. Now, how song development works in the cowbird is their first song is almost like a song of saying, feed me, feed me, feed me, to make sure that they're fed. And then they don't develop their adult song until later on in life when they're around other cowbirds. By then, they'll develop a song that's appropriate for mating. Let's move on to some behaviors that are strictly learned. The first one that I want to talk about is habituation. Another name for this is the cry wolf effect, after the story for the boy who cried wolf. Now, if you heard that story before, it kind of goes like this. There's a boy that was watching sheep, and he got kind of bored, so what he would do was cry wolf, and the whole village would come running to help save the sheep. And he did it as a joke a couple of times, and there really wasn't a wolf. And then, when there was a real wolf, the town had been habituated to think that it was just a joke, and they didn't come and respond. Some classic examples of habituation involve wild animals becoming habituated to people. So what habituation means is when an animal loses a response or a reaction to a stimulus, when they figure out that that stimulus isn't harmful to them. So it's trivial or unimportant. So, even though these classic examples are with animals interacting with humans when they realize that humans aren't going to hurt them, that's not particularly relevant in nature. So let's think about a situation in nature and how it would be helpful. So let's use the example of falling leaves and baby birds. Now you can imagine that rustling leaves or falling leaves in a certain pattern would happen all the time for a baby bird. And if it reacted startled every single time it heard that, it would be a waste of time and a waste of energy, and it might distract the bird from relevant stimuli. So, what's the proximate cause of this? Well, the stimulus would be those falling leaves, which would eventually become irrelevant. And the ultimate cause, or evolutionary advantage of this, is that if an animal becomes habituated to an unimportant stimulus, it's going to allow better reaction and better ability to kind of pay attention to new stimuli or stimuli that they know are important. The last type of learned behavior that I want to talk about is problem solving, and this is kind of the pinnacle of learned behavior. In order to problem solve, an animal must have, or an organism must have, a very complex nervous system. And I think we take problem solving for granted, but if you break it down, to problem solve you have to be able to perceive stuff, store information so that when you see it again you can solve the problem faster. Then you have to process the information and use it. And here are some examples of problem solving right here. This primate is trying to get food, and in this case insects that are living in a nest, and it's very difficult to get those insects out. So what the primate does was harvest a piece of grass, stick that grass down into the hole of the nest, give some time for insects to kind of grab on to that piece of grass, take it out, and then just swipe it through their mouth to clean it off. Here's another example of a bird that's used problem solving to figure out how to get this piece of meat from a string that's tied on a branch. Now the cool thing about these birds is that every time they're presented with the same problem, they're able to solve that problem faster and faster, showing that they're capable of learning and storing all of this information. What's supposed to be shown here is a picture of an otter, and otters eat things like oysters and clams, and what they have to do is crack those open. And they actually learned how to use rocks to help them crack that open. For the last section of this video, we're going to concentrate on social behaviors. So that implies behaviors within a society or a group of individuals in a population. So, I want you to be mindful of thinking about these again, their proximate and ultimate causes, and how to connect them through evolution. So we're going to march through these 5 examples, and you should be able to define them and give examples of each.